So today I was looking around on jw.org for some information, and of course, when you go to the homepage, you always see some articles that they want to showcase. And I thought it would be interesting just to go through one of them. It's a really quick, short little article. So let's take a peek. I'm just going to do this on the fly. I'm not going to do any research or anything first. I'm just going to give my thoughts on it, and here we go. What does the Bible say about Christmas? The Bible's answer. The Bible does not give the date of Jesus' birth, nor does it say that we should celebrate his birthday. As McClintock and Strong's Cyclopedia states, the observance of Christmas is not of divine appointment, nor is it of NT or New Testament origin. So my thoughts on this is that that's true, and Christians know this. So starting with this is kind of already creating a straw man. Like, we have this sort of worship of December 25th when that's not the case. In fact, when you look back at the history of the church, you'll see that Christians in the very early church did recognize Christ's birth to be within the 12 days of Christmas, which was between December 25th and January 5th. That's the range that they had calculated based on quite a number of really compelling things. Now, I know a lot of people think that maybe he was born in the fall or in the summer or something like that, and really that's fine. Like, it doesn't matter that much, because we choose a day to celebrate Christ's birth just like the angels did, then what's wrong with that? Like, that's a nice thing. As long as we're not turning it into some kind of worship sort of thing, it's just a recognition how exciting that God came down, took on flesh to save us. I mean, that's amazing. So we're already kind of off to a rough start here, Watchtower. Okay, moving on. Instead, an examination of the history of Christmas exposes its roots in pagan religious rites. The Bible shows that we offend God if we try to worship him in a way that he does not approve of. So, to deal with the second sentence there, first of all, I actually do agree with that. We should not worship in a way that God does not approve of. And that applies to corporate worship. So that means when we gather as saints to worship God, we follow the standards that he has laid out for us, because then we know we're actually glorifying him in the way that he has actually told us to. Like, he's given us that. So we should definitely pay attention to that. Now, as for the first sentence about it being roots in pagan religious rites, that is a very common claim that's not actually true. Christians were actually being persecuted by the pagans. They were not trying to be like the pagans. It makes no sense. Like, why would they take on pagan celebrations while they're hiding in caves trying not to be killed or tortured by these pagans? It just makes no sense. So, I understand that there are pagan practices that have been brought in and tied in and mixed in, and then you've got Constantine all wrapped up in this, and I get that. It is more complicated in that, but the roots themselves really are important to remember that they're actually from early Christians. So there's already a problem here. They're trying to paint a picture that just isn't there. Okay, moving on. History of Christmas customs. Number 1, celebrating Jesus' birthday. The early Christians did not celebrate Jesus' birth because they considered the celebration of anyone's birth to be a pagan custom. The World Book Encyclopedia. So I don't have a copy of that here, so I can't look at the context, but I'm guessing that would show you a whole lot more of what's actually going on here. I also don't know how trustworthy this encyclopedia is and what kind of background it comes from. And it's especially kind of suspect that the Watchtower likes it, right? Because they really like to use sources that, back up whatever they want to say, not necessarily trustworthy sources. So I don't know with that one, and I don't have the time to go look it up for you right now. The statement itself is actually not true, that Christians never celebrated birthdays. I mean, there probably have been some that don't celebrate birthdays, and that's fine, but it's not an early Christian tradition to reject celebrating birthdays or anything like that. So yeah, it's kind of a stretch there, but it's convenient for Watchtower to have that number 1 point. So number 2, December 25th. There is no proof that Jesus was born on that date. Now, we already know that. We've talked about that. Church leaders likely chose this date to coincide with pagan festivals held on or around the winter solstice. And as I have already addressed this, That makes no sense because the early church was a persecuted church. So trying to meld in with pagans while being persecuted doesn't really make sense. I mean, what they would have to have done then is completely abandon the faith, which I understand the Watchtower teaches the great apostasy and all this kind of thing, but actual Christians throughout history didn't do that. So, and that is recorded history. You know, we know that Christians continued to be persecuted and killed for the faith and still are today. And so trying to coincide or amalgamate with pagan ideas is just really, you know, it's a silly idea. This idea that somehow they're trying to make themselves more palatable to the pagans. They actually were persecuted for standing up for and preaching boldly things that pagans hated. So you'd have to surrender that if you wanted to really meld yourself in with pagan ideas. Number 3, gift giving, feasting, partying. The Encyclopedia Americana says, Saturnalia, a Roman feast celebrated in mid-December, provided the model for many of the merry-making customs of Christmas. From this celebration, for example, were derived the elaborate feasting, the giving of gifts, and the burning of candles. The Encyclopedia Britannica notes that all work and businesses were suspended during Saturnalia. So again, this is kind of trying to make a giant leap between these two things. I mean, if you look back at the Jewish people throughout all of the Bible, but especially look at the festivals, the feasts in the Old Testament, they knew how to party. I mean, we're talking about major feasts and gift giving and taking time off of work and all that kind of thing. That's just, it's not a specifically pagan thing. So trying to draw that in again is really problematic. Another thing is that I understand that a lot of people try to use Saturnalia as the excuse for not celebrating Christmas. That's what it really was. So if you're celebrating Christmas, you're really celebrating Saturnalia. Well, Saturnalia was not even on December 25th. And anyway, there's a lot more that I could share about that. But what I'll do is I'll just reference you to a recent video that Melissa Doherty did about it. It's a satire video, pretty funny, and it's a quick video. So I recommend checking that one out to give you a little bit more information about that specific claim. Number 4, Christmas lights. According to the Encyclopedia of Religion, Europeans decorated their homes with lights and evergreens of all kinds to celebrate the winter solstice and to combat evil spirits. Again, like I don't know what the Encyclopedia of Religion is, where it comes from, so I would want to dig into that a little bit more maybe. So there are people that have done that, like no question, but as a general rule for Christians, when they have celebrated with Christmas trees and lights, it's actually just to celebrate Christ. It's not because they want to be pagan or anything like that. In fact, if you spend a little bit of time looking into Martin Luther, he used a tree and the light as the light. Christ is the light of the world, and he certainly wasn't trying to be a pagan here. So were there people throughout history who are celebrating pagan things who are very superstitious? Absolutely. But to try and tie that into celebrating Christmas or not and using Christmas lights, again, it's just a huge stretch, in my opinion. Okay, number 5, mistletoe holly. The Druids ascribed magical properties to the mistletoe in particular. The evergreen holly was worshipped as a promise of the sun's return. The Encyclopedia Americana. So again, I'm not going to take the time right now to look that up, but I don't doubt it. I think that's probably a realistic background for mistletoe. The thing is, mistletoe isn't really like a worship thing or a celebrating Christmas thing even. It's just become a fun party kind of thing that people do, kind of like something else that the JWs like, which would be piñatas. Also of pagan origin, but okay to enjoy now because we're not celebrating any kind of pagan anything. It's just a fun, silly thing to do. I think mistletoe would really fall in that category. Number 6, Christmas tree. Tree worship, common among the pagan Europeans, survived after their conversion to Christianity. One of the ways in which tree worship survived is in the custom of placing a Yule tree at the entrance or inside the house of the Midwinter Holidays, Encyclopedia Britannica. So again, there's a lot of mishmash here. Yes, definitely. I have read about the whole Yule log, that kind of thing, that definitely had a whole pagan background. And that's something to be aware of, right? Because we don't really want to be attaching ourselves to pagan rituals needlessly. I mean, there's nothing bad about, burning logs on a fire on a cold winter's day. That's fine, obviously, and you can even enjoy it and, make the most of it. But again, this kind of goes back to the piñata thing. And tree worship. Now, when people have Christmas trees, I really want to deal with this. Okay, so Christmas trees, I've never, ever, ever known anyone to worship a Christmas tree, really. Whether they're Christian or pagan, it's just not done. And it's, again, another straw man argument, because that's not how it is. The Christmas tree generally today is used to add a little bit of pretty decoration and lights into your home on dark winter days. People like to celebrate. It's family related. There's all kinds of things that are really very harmless about it. So to suggest that it's just bringing in pagan things after they became Christians, well, yeah, that's another kind of massive stretch, I would have to say. Now, when it comes to Christmas trees, like, we don't actually have one in our home. We don't bother with them. We used to, but they're just a bother because, we have pets and they tend to make a giant mess of it. So we just don't bother, and it's kind of nice. I enjoy not having one. We do put lights up because it's nice. It brightens up the place. It's really dark this time of year in Canada, so what's wrong with some colorful bright lights? I think they're great, and yeah, it is the season for it, so that's fine. I just don't see the problem with it. When it comes to actually just celebrating Christmas, there are a lot of Christians. The Watchtower won't tell you this, but there are a lot of Christians throughout history who don't celebrate Christmas. You can take the Puritans, for example, and a lot of reformers today still don't celebrate Christmas. They just don't consider it something that is of importance because they would consider it outside of what is called the regulative principle of worship. There's differing opinions on that, and that's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with celebrating or not celebrating Christmas, as long as it doesn't take over the Lord's Day worship. That's really important, because that's a different thing. So, in my opinion, you can celebrate Christmas if you want to, and especially if you're an XJW, I'll bet you really do want to, because you missed out on that for all those years. So that's great. Go for it, And if you don't celebrate Christmas, that's also totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, maybe if you're an XJW and you still feel kind of weird about it, then that's okay. Then don't violate your conscience. But of course, I understand the reason the Watchtower put this article out is because they want to demonize Christians. They want to demonize us for celebrating the birth of God incarnate coming to earth. They hate that. And so if they can make you hate Christians for that, they can make you angry with us or look down on us, then they've accomplished what they set out to do. So anyway, I thought this was kind of an interesting article to just go through since it's so quick. And I've read many other things on their website that are quite similar. They say the same kind of silly things. And it's unfortunate that they are willing to, of course, misquote or twist or take little pieces of quotes and string them together and just go with the general straw man arguments yet again. I have a few more thoughts that I want to share too about Christmas in general. For one thing, one of the big complaints that I think we all have is the amount of commercialism that goes on these days. It's really become so much a part of our culture. And a lot of it actually really started back in the UK, back in the days when the beautiful story, the beautiful lights and traditions and everything that were developed that are still celebrated today, they were just a cultural development. They weren't really related to Christ or celebrating his birth. So it's kind of important to remember that. We don't need the commercialism. It's not a good idea to go into debt buying presents for your loved ones because there's some kind of pressure to make them feel loved or anything like that. So I recommend not even bothering with that. We don't really do a lot in the way of presents in our family, and I think that's a really good precedent to set for your family too. That's just my advice. Especially, when it comes to things like Santa Claus, which has nothing to do with Christmas. Santa Claus is, again, something that's been developed. It's really, something that has become a fun thing in a helpful way, or at least they think a helpful, pragmatic way for parents to make sure their kids behave themselves while they're eating all the sugary Christmas goodies and things. Make sure you're good because Santa will know if you're not, and that's not a helpful thing. I don't think it's a good idea to tell your kids to believe in Santa Claus. I mean, it's okay to talk about it, maybe even enjoy the fairy tale. Just treat it like a fairy tale with your kids. I think that's the best way to go. And I'm not judging. I know people have different ways of doing things, but it can be a problem when you basically lie to your kids and convince them Santa Claus is real, and then eventually, of course, their hearts are going to be broken one day when they find out that it was all just make believe. Because it gets too confusing when kids are encouraged to actually believe it's true and put their hope in that. That's not a good thing. And I know that people sometimes, when they come out of false religions, they tie that in with Santa Claus and say, well, I was lied to about this and I was lied to about that too. And that's not a path we want to take, I don't think. In my family, when I was little, my parents were not Christians and they did the usual Santa Claus thing. So we did grow up believing in Santa Claus. But my particular story is not a sad one. I figured it out myself when we had family over and my uncle came over pretending to be Santa Claus, and I figured out that it was my uncle, and that kind of opened my eyes to understand. But I actually kind of felt clever at the time because I was the only one of the kids to figure out that he wasn't really Santa Claus. So that was not a big deal for me, but that's not often the case with kids. They often get their hearts broken when they find out. So I don't think it's a good idea. Also, the Santa Claus that is represented today is actually sort of a development from the Coca-Cola company. It's not even anything to do with the real Saint Nick from back in the 300s. In fact, it's kind of interesting. The real Saint Nicholas actually punched Arius at the Council of Nicaea. So I wonder if that has anything to do with why the Watchtower, hates Christmas so much and hates anything to do with Santa Claus, because they love Arius. They consider him to be one of their, fathers of their faith and that kind of thing. So anyway, I thought that was an interesting little tidbit. I don't know if it has anything to do with it, but yeah, St. Nicholas has nothing to do with modern day Santa Claus at all. So, and I also want to talk to people who are feeling a lot of pressure for the holiday season. I understand that pressure. We used to have that in my family, and we decided we were done with that, and we just took a step back and said, no, thank you. We're not going to do that anymore. And man, was it ever freeing to just say, we're not going to travel all over for this little holiday that we have, this little bit of time off work. We're not going to spend it all exhausting ourselves, driving everywhere, getting sick because we're being exposed to all kinds of sick people because 'tis the season for cold and flu. And we're not going to blow tons of money on people either for presents. We're just not going to engage in any of that kind of stuff. And I tell you, when we let that go, man, I actually enjoy Christmas now. For a long time, I really didn't, because it was just so much pressure to get out, go to the malls, get the presents, travel, plan everything, try to have this supposedly perfect Christmas every year, which is impossible to attain, really. So if you're alone or you're struggling, or you're just feeling overwhelmed or pressured by all of these things, I really, really encourage you to just remember that Christmas, if you're going to celebrate Christmas, then celebrate Christ. Celebrate what he did for you on the cross. Celebrate his birth. Celebrate God coming to earth, tabernacling among men. And just celebrate that. Don't worry about the rest of the stuff. It's really, I know it can be complicated with families, but do what you can to try to get away from that, because it's needless. It's needless pressure. And that's definitely not what the purpose was for the early Christians when they celebrated Christ. They actually just recognized and were excited about the fact that Christ came to earth. That's it. It wasn't a big to-do in that sense. And if you don't have a perfect Christmas, if it's sad, if you're alone, if you're isolated, then, just pray for the peace of God for you. And know that it's really not about all the things that we see in the movies and the pressure on all the TV ads and all that kind of stuff. It's not about any of that. So I hope you can really meditate on Christ and who he is and what he has accomplished, instead of all of the pressure to make this fairy tale perfect Christmas happen, because that's not even a real thing, and we shouldn't be pushing ourselves to do that. So now that I'm talking about all that, I would guess that any JW listening to this, if any of them even would listen this far, would probably be like, see, Christmas is bad. But it's not. It doesn't have to be. The thing is, I think we just really have to look at it. We have to always evaluate our culture and keep on reforming to biblical standards and looking at at what Christ wants for us and celebrating who he is and loving him and worshiping him. And if we do that, all the rest just falls away. It's just not important. And there's no need to be judgmental or to make an us versus them kind of ideology. Some people celebrate Christmas, some people don't. People do it in different ways. That's completely fine. It shouldn't matter. For Christians, we're united in Christ, not in whether we celebrate a holiday or not. Thank you for listening, and I hope you can appreciate my thoughts. And feel free to comment below if you agree or disagree. That's totally fine. Merry Christmas, and Happy New Year, and God bless.